When your mom worked at the Shuckle Cannery, that was seasonal work?
That was seasonal.
Yeah.
I don't know if the cannery actually ran all year. There was that cannery, Shuckles, and then there was Booth Cannery in Newark, I believe it was too. And there may have been some other... Centerville, thank you.
Yeah.
And I can remember my mother working on the line inside the cannery doing maraschino cherries, and I thought maraschino cherries were always red, but they weren't. They were yellow, pale yellow, and they colored them, so that was a big surprise. And you could smell like sulfuric acid in there, but a lot of the women worked there, and they had a real good time. And they laughed together, they ate lunch together, and they were mostly Niles women, and they all knew each other.
Yeah.
You know, and
It was like one big family. Huh?
Like, yeah, and they had nice dresses that they wore, and they wore white aprons, and then usually they had a pocket on their dress, and they would put a fancy handkerchief and spread it out like waitresses used to do. It looked like a flower. And my mother really had a good time there.
Do you remember the flood in 1952?
I do. I remember, not a lot about it, but I remember, I think it was Gary Payton's house on the corner on Niles Boulevard, where the water sort of came about halfway up inside the house. I remember that. I remember going in there and seeing that house and where the water line was. Then later, the flood control, Alameda Flood Control came in and fixed that, so hopefully we don't have that anymore. Let's see.
You had mentioned that you went to the Center of Theater. Do you remember how you got there?
Usually it was either my dad, a lot of us weren't driving yet, and we didn't have, what do you call it when you learn to drive?
License?
Yeah, you know, driver's training, driver's ed. We didn't have that. Your father taught you, or an uncle taught you, or something, because like I say, a lot of mothers didn't drive. So we started kind of learning to drive, but there were hardly any cars parked at school because people didn't get the family car. You know, they didn't all have licenses.
Yeah.
Although we drove without them too. We did. So getting to the theater would be somebody's parent usually, and my dad he had a pickup and he would haul a lot of kids in the back of the pickup. That's how we got there. So that was fun. It was a lot of fun.
Did you go to Washington High or James Logan?
I went to Washington High. I think it was the last year when I was a senior, I believe, is when James Logan opened. And some of the kids that were with us that had lived in Dakota and Alvarado had to return to go to James Logan High and graduate there. So we missed them a lot because it was just one high school. And we had the most wonderful principal in the whole world that any child could ever have, and that was Pop Goold. And those were the days where you could go arm in arm with your principal, and there was never anything said about it. That was all okay. He always had his arm around the kids. We just clamored to be able to hold his arm and walk with him. A great story about Pop was he was a very classy man, and I talked all the time in class, and the teacher said, if you don't stop talking, I'm going to put you out in the hall. Well, we didn't stop, of course, Carol Pugmire and I. So she put me out in the hall, desk and everything. I was 16 years old. I'm sitting in the hall with my desk, and way down at the end of the hall, I see Pop coming. It's just him and me in this big hallway, and I thought, what? I just wanted to crawl away somewhere. I was so embarrassed. And he kept walking, kept coming. He always wore a hat. He got right up to me, tipped his hat to me and said, "Good afternoon, miss," and he walked on. He didn't say a single word. I was like, oh, thank you. That was classy on his part, I thought. And I just adored him. Really, we all did. Yeah. So he was there for a long time. And we had a really, really great time. All those years we had fun. We had a lot of fun. When I used to go out to the mill with my dad, I mentioned earlier, and on a Saturday, And they would all sit around, the guys, and chew the fat, as they called it. So language and everything, cigarettes all going. You know, I sat and wrote down everything they said. And I wrote stories about the mill that they told from their point of view. And I made them funny stories, and we all had good laughs. And I typed them all up, and my dad would take them back to work, and the guys would read them and approve them. And they liked them, so I was happy with that. Yeah.
How
So-
did you meet your husband?
Well, I think you'll really laugh at this one. At the intersection of Mission Boulevard and right where you go into Niles, where the sign is, I met him in that intersection. And I was with my friend Carol Pugmire. She did have a license and she did have the family car. We pulled up to the red light. She was going to take me to my home after school on Morrison Canyon Road. And there was a car next to us at the light also, and it was filled with soldiers. And we turned and we started batting our eyes at them and waving at them. And when the light turned green, Carol took off, and she had a heavy foot on the gas pedal anyway, and we were flying down Mission Boulevard to go to my house. And this car full of soldiers followed us. And we got to my house, we ran in the house, and they pulled up out in front of the house and parked there. And my mother said, "Who's that out in front of the house?" And Carol said, "They're friends of mine from church." And she said, "Oh, how nice, invite them in." And these 5 strange guys came in the house, and she said, "I'll make coffee and cake for them." And all I could do was look at the clock and think, my dad is going to be home any minute, and this isn't going to go over very well. So he, pretty soon I heard his truck pull up, and he came in. I was just shaking in my boots, and here's all these soldiers sitting around the table. And my dad came in the house, and he said, "What's all this?" And Carol said, "These are friends of mine from church." And he said, "Uh-huh." And he didn't believe it. He never did believe anything she said anyway. So after that, my husband-to-be was one of those soldiers. And he called me up. I guess I gave him the number. I don't remember how that happened, but I think we were in the phone book anyway. But he called me up. He was very smart. I never thought any guy would ever meet the approval of my father. But he did. My dad's name was Elmer, and my husband's name is Elmer also. So my Elmer would come over to call on me, but he would go out in the workshop first and visit with my dad before he ever came in the house and said hi to me. And I'd be peeking out the kitchen windows going, "What are they doing out there? When is he going to come in the house?" So 11 months later, we were married, and that was 59 years ago. And so I often think today, if my daughter had met someone that way, I would have had a pretty close eye on everything. But it all worked out great. So the day after we got married, we left for Wisconsin. He had a job there, and I was gone for 10 years, 8 in Wisconsin and 2 in Florida, which was just something we tried for fun. And then one day, my husband came home. We lived on a farm, and we had 2 children, and we also had 2 foster children. And he said he was done with the cold weather. He didn't want to work it anymore. He was stationed here in the Army, and he just loved it here. And he said, "I want to go back to he called them the Golden Hills. He says, "I want to go back to the Golden Hills, and I want no snow." So we left shortly thereafter and moved out here.
Did you have your children then? Or?
Yeah, they were both born in Wisconsin, Michael and Sharon. And we all live out here now, which is nice, so we're all close together. Yeah.
What year did you return to California?
1963. Yeah. So our
bet you
children
were
were real
glad to be
small.
back, huh?
Glad to be back, yeah. And although I have to say, I loved Wisconsin. I loved my husband's family. There was a lot of them, and we had a good time. And I'd probably still be there. I did love it there. But he He wanted a little better weather, so that's why we came.
Oh, where did you live when you returned to California?
Oh, interestingly enough, we moved to Morrison Canyon Road. There was an old, very, very old house across the street from my parents, also owned by the Corderolis. And then behind that house was the one, I think you were telling me, it was the Gomes place. The house on Morrison Canyon Road was an interesting place because it was full of trash when we found it, but the rent was great, and it really was a cute place, even though it was on a slant and you had to walk uphill on the floors inside. But it was a great place to live, and we raised chickens there and had a big garden, and the train went by right there too. And we were right across from my mother and dad, so the kids saw their grandparents all the time. It all worked out really well. Yeah.
How many children do you have?
We have two. I have Michael, and
And the years that they were born?
64 and 66. And they, our daughter lives in Pleasanton and our son is in Placerville. Yeah.
Getting back to the steel mill, do you remember some of the names of the people that your dad worked with?
Yes, I do.
And where
some.
they lived?
One was Walt Riddle. He was the metallurgist. Claude Roberts was my dad's boss. Joe Eastwood Jr. was the owner. His father had owned Pacific State Steel before him. That was Joe Eastwood Sr. Later, Joe Eastwood III became the owner. And that's when I think things started to kind of go downhill a little bit. And there were strikes in there too. And but
You had mentioned that you worked for the credit union of the steel mill.
I worked for the Pasco Credit Union, which was Pacific State Steel Credit Union on Niles Boulevard. And we had, there was probably a couple thousand members in that credit union. And so I got to see, working there, I got to see a lot of the guys from the mill too that came in there. And I did work in the steel mill office one summer doing, of all things, statistical typing. It was just awful. And fortunately, I had very patient people, because if you made a mistake, you had to start all over. It's not like a computer. It was a typewriter. So it's not like a computer where you could back things out. You had to start all over or white it out some way. So I hated the job, but it was a nice place to work. It really was, yeah. And there was a nice lady in the office named Elizabeth
What
Nash.
year did you work there? Do you remember?
Probably as a sophomore or a junior. Because I was also a bus girl at International Kitchen at that time too, so I was working someplace all the time. Mm-hmm. Yeah. High school days, I think I had a lot of fun in high school, and we were in shows. I hung out with a lot of girls who went to the Mormon church. In my Girl Scout troop, my Brownie troop, and high school, and we put on a lot of shows, and we traveled all around the Bay Area doing dances, and we made costumes and danced in shows, and I liked that. I did some theater in high school, and learned public speaking there too. So, and I was actually going to go to university with my friend Carol Pugmire, and was registered, and then met my husband at the intersection, and so we got married, and that was that. So yeah, it was fun. It all works out. All works out for the best.
Do you remember who your scout leader was? Brownie troop number?
Brownie troop, not the number, but the Brownie troop was Elaine Pine's mother. Her dad was Clarence, and they were on 2nd Street. And we met in a Quonset hut, an old war building out behind the grade school, way back in the baseball field there. That's where we met. And then for Girl Scouts, it was Isabel Oxborough was our leader, Kathy Oxborough's mother, and she gave us a great time all the time. We had sleepovers at their house. She made stacks of cinnamon toast for us. I kissed my first boy there. We played spin the bottle out in the backyard. It was, oh, we had a lot of good times. And Isabel would drive us around in her car.
That was on 2nd Street.
That was on 2nd Street, that house, and it had a big basement. We did Halloween parties there. Isabel drove us around. I think it was an old DeSoto, and she would sing, and we'd all sit in the back seat and sing, and she drove us around town. So we had a lot of really, really good times. I would like to say that living in Niles was actually an honor and a privilege. I got to see women who operated stores, and they became female role models for all of us because they were entrepreneurs, only we didn't call them that. We used to just say, well, she worked in the store, but they actually owned the store.
Yeah.
You know, and Arlene DiGilio's family showed us what business was like, and I want to mention Arlene and her family because not only were they neighbors, but they were our landlords. And I never realized that until later in life even. I didn't even know. So it was a great, great time. And I'm still getting to see people that I haven't seen in 50 or 60 years. Once in a while we have nice Niles girls luncheons, which is a lot of fun. And but I'm grateful for the privilege that I had. And my husband and I both grew up in small towns, and that's something that we treasure a lot. And I treasure the fact that I was safe. I didn't know I was safe. I just played and had fun and went to school, but I was safe all the time. I didn't have to worry about things. And people looked out for us and cared for us, and I still have those friends today. So Niles and all the surrounding little towns, Warm Springs, Decoto, Alvarado, all of us kids went to school together, and we all came from small towns. Each one was different, but
Thank you.
you're welcome.